Howdy, my name is Gabriella Reiner, and I am discussing CRE number 4. So, to start off with my positionality, I am a white 19-year-old female college student. Um, I personally have experienced trouble with toxic masculinity, and then I have definitely not necessarily experienced violence, but definitely sexual harassment I have experienced as a woman. And I know others that have experienced domestic violence as well. So that brings me to my first two issues that I will be discussing. Today, I will be discussing toxic masculinity and domestic/sexual violence. So toxic masculinity, as in reference to lecture 16, describes the behavior of men that is toxic, such as emotional detachment, aggression, and sexual objectification, just to name a few. Toxic masculinity itself stems from the patriarchy of society today. As referenced in course media, the toxic male, today's current toxic male has arisen in response to the hashtag #MeToo movement, which, as discussed in class, was a powerful movement of individuals finally breaking their silence on their experience with sexual violence. Hollywood and media has further perpetrated the glorification of this type of male, especially by romanticizing them. So, different TV shows, they gave Euphoria, for example. I know older popular TV show, Vampire Diaries, definitely had several examples of popular toxic males. So, to move on to domestic and sexual violence, in reference to lecture 7 in class, is defined as violent or aggressive behavior within the home. Domestic violence itself appears to stem directly from toxic masculinity. And that brings me into how they are connected. The behaviors perpetrated by toxic masculinity lead to domestic and sexual violence. In the course media, Why Domestic Violence Victims Don't Leave, Leslie Steiner recounts her own experience with domestic violence. In this recounting, there are several instances where behaviors of toxic masculinity, such as aggression and emotional detachment, turned into violence, which ultimately almost cost her her life. And that leads into how they connect to the patriarchy. Patriarchy, as defined in lecture 17, is a familial, social, ideological, and/or political system in which men, by force, direct pressure, or through tradition, law, language, customs, etc., determine what part women shall or shall not play in society. That is, determine how much of a role they shall play in society. Toxic masculinity is directly derived from patriarchy, which uses power and privilege of men to oppress women. The power men have over women directly contributes to the toxic behaviors of aggression and gender superiority, which are key characteristics of toxic masculinity. This directly leads into domestic and sexual violence perpetrated by men. They believe it is their inherent right to a woman's body, whatever that means. And finally, that leads into what can be done to lessen and destroy the problem of the patriarchy and how it causes domestic violence and toxic masculinity itself. The solutions to destroy the patriarchy are actually quite simple. It can start with men becoming better allies. In course media by Johnson and Smith, it is discussed how men can support women by engaging in supportive partnerships with women and taking action against those not supportive of women. This can be friends, family, just peers in general. Examples of this: when you are in a social situation and you hear someone starting to make locker room talk or sexist jokes or any derogatory reference to any woman, you can stop them and say, hey, that's not right. And this, and this is why it is not okay to do that. It can start to open up their mindset because more likely than not, they have never had anyone in their life question them on that type of behavior. And until they do, they aren't going to see a problem with it and they aren't going to stop it. So that is why it is very important to have male allies. Along with this, in Course Media with Dr. Lindsay Dow, it is discussed how we can break the cycle of abuse by simply listening to women. The patriarchy thrives on men and women seeing themselves as fundamentally different from one another. If men and women start talking to each other, start openly discussing these very difficult topics, then we will be closer to dismantling the patriarchy. As long as we see each other as inherently different from one another, nothing is going to get fixed. So that is why it is very important to have strong, open communication between men and women. That is all I have today. Thank you so much for listening.